Hey friends, how you doing? Eric Eulis here. Hope you're having a great day. Like I'm having a great day. I always do my best to have a great day. Not always successful, but I at least do my best. So in any case, let's talk a little bit of DB Cooper here. As some of you know, I do plan on putting out some new content related to DB Cooper on this YouTube channel. And rest assured, it's going to be a lot more than me just sitting in this chair here talking about DB Cooper, pretending like I know everything. It's actually going to be very active. As some of you know, I've actually got this active dig taking place at Tina Bar in Washington State, so that will be part of the programming. There'll be additional searching around Washington State as well. Moreover, there's going to also be some searching on the East Coast, specifically the Connecticut area, which I'll get into here in a minute. But I think probably the smartest thing to do is to just give you a very brief overview of what I think happened as far as the skyjacking takes place. This is Eric Eulis' theory on what actually happened, where DB Cooper came from, and what happened and where he went. And that'll serve as a foundation for all the programming moving forward related to DB Cooper. So to begin with, I think it's pretty clear that DB Cooper started his day in Seattle. In other words, he caught a flight in Seattle, flew down to Portland for the express purpose of skyjacking a jet in Portland on the way back to Seattle for collecting 200 grand, and that's really the end game, is the 200 grand. So once he's in Seattle, gets the 200 grand, gets his 4 parachutes, the jet obviously takes off south, ostensibly to Mexico City with the fuel stop in Reno. But I don't believe that Cooper's plans involved going to Reno or certainly going to Mexico City. I believe Cooper's plans were to jump really almost immediately after the jet took off from Seattle. I believe his plans were to jump right there in the outskirts of Seattle or the exurbs of Seattle. If he does that, he essentially ends his day where he begins his day, that is in Seattle. So I think his plan was to jump in the exurbs of Seattle, land obviously safely, and temporarily stash the cash. I think that Cooper already had a motel room set up with a fresh change of clothes and all that good stuff, and I also think he had a car set aside, probably a rental car sitting there as well. So once Cooper lands, stashes the cash, he works his way back to his motel room, whatever, freshens up, changes his clothes, gets out of his DB Cooper uniform, whatever you want to call it, and gets in his rental car and drives back to where he landed to retrieve the cash that he stashed. Now, all of this really could happen probably in a little more than an hour. It's not like it's going to take a significant amount of time to have this all unfold. I think it's just a little bit over an hour. Now, remember, as this is happening, the jet is still lugging along at 200 miles an hour down to Reno. That flight alone was something around 2.5 to 3 hours. So it was a long flight on the way down to Reno. So he's got a real big head start or jump start, whatever, on the authorities at this point. So once he collects the money, I believe his plan is to, believe it or not, to drive to SeaTac, check in his car to Hertz or wherever the hell he rented his car from, and get on a flight to the East Coast. And I checked into this, and there was one graveyard flight, late flight that left about 10:30 that evening, a United Airlines flight that flew from Seattle to JFK, to New York. I believe his plan was to catch that flight and end up basically on the East Coast when all is said and done. Now, again, factoring in the time frame and everything, the interesting thing is that he's literally on the jet taking off for New York City out of Seattle about the same time that the jet is landing, the skyjacked airliner is landing in Reno, and the authorities are realizing DB Cooper's not there anymore. So he's got a real big head start on law enforcement at this point. So the question then becomes, why the East Coast? I mean, what's the story with that? The tall and short of it is, I think that's where the guy lived. Specifically, I think he probably lived in Connecticut. Therefore, the 2021 search around Connecticut. And this is what I mean as far as that goes. There's a fair amount of evidence on the tie that Tom K picked up from the tie. The commercially pure titanium, high-grade stainless steel, high-grade aluminum. There's also a fair amount of salt, an industrial type of salt, and sand. And ultimately, I think all of those things working together paint a picture, and here's what I mean. I think it's pretty clear that D.B. Cooper came from the aerospace sector. So, either Boeing or Boeing related. Now, I don't think he came from Boeing specifically. I think it's much more likely that he came from a subcontractor or somebody working with Boeing. This is where Pratt Whitney aircraft engines comes into the equation. So I believe that he came from Pratt Whitney, which is headquartered in Hartford, at least back then was headquartered in Hartford, Connecticut. They built the engines that were on the 727. There's also an awful lot of commercially pure titanium that's used in these specific engines called the JT8D engines. Also, Pratt Whitney has an extended relationship with Boeing going back decades, building engines for their other aircraft as well, the Boeing 707 in particular and some other military aircraft. So I think that's the relationship that D.B. Cooper has to Boeing and ultimately to the Boeing 727 and the Pacific Northwest and Seattle and all that stuff right there. Now, I think that the salt and the sand tell a story, and there's a couple. These are things that are easy to overlook on the tie. But what I think they do is actually point right at a cold weather place like Connecticut. I believe that salt and sand is consistent with the salt and the sand that was applied to roads during the wintertime in cold weather places. And I've checked into this quite a bit, and I won't get into the details right now. So that's part of the rationale. That's part of why I ultimately settled on the Connecticut area and specifically Pratt and Whitney as far as the location for D.B. Cooper. And I think it also just happens to dovetail very nicely with the flight, leaving Seattle and everything else. So either way, that's my theory as far as that goes. And that's it. I mean, that's all we're dealing with at this point here. Moving forward, I'm going to put an awful lot of meat on the bones. I'm going to discuss an awful lot of the evidence and give you a very good idea, a very clear idea of why it is that I think that answers and explains, where D.B. Cooper came from and where he ultimately ended up wanting to end up at. Now, having said that, we all know that D.B. Cooper did not jump in the outskirts of Seattle, that he actually jumped very near Vancouver, Washington. I think the reasons for that are clear. He got delayed, couldn't make the jump, and he, I guess took the next best opportunity, which happened to be the suburbs of Portland, Vancouver, as opposed to the suburbs of Seattle. How the money ends up on Tina Bar, I think it's very obvious that D.B. Cooper buried that money on Tina Bar because he couldn't very well walk back into town carrying 20 pounds of cash. So he buried it with the express purpose of coming back at a later date to actually retrieve the cash, and I think that's what he did, the $6,000 that was left behind notwithstanding. So that is part of the story that I'll get into. So the really cool thing about this, folks, is that I think that we've got enough evidence out there right now to actually put the pieces together and figure out who this guy was. I think we've actually got everything we need right now to do it. Now, having said that, let's go and try to find some additional evidence and let's see where it takes us. But I'm feeling pretty stoked about this. I'm feeling pretty jacked and stoked about the next 12 months because I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission over the next 12 months to either identify D.B. Cooper or find something new in the form of some concrete evidence related to D.B. Cooper, either the briefcase or the parachutes or one of these fiberglass skirts that tore away from the back end of the jet. I think those are up near Cinnabar, Washington. So that's my goal. My goal is to actually find something new and tangible related to this case in the next 12 months. Actually, ultimately, I'd like to identify who the guy is, and that's where Connecticut comes into the picture. So again, anything, all the stuff that I put out moving forward related to D.B. Cooper, and I'll get this out a little bit tongue-tied this morning because I'm so thrilled, I'm so excited about this, is going to be much more active. Again, it's not just going to be me sitting in a chair here talking about it. It's actually going to be active. You're going to go along for the ride. You're going to see exactly what's happening in real time as we search not only the Pacific Northwest, but also the East Coast as well, looking for D.B. Cooper. All right, folks, that's it for today. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to shoot me an email. My email address is eric at ericulis.com. Again, that's Eric at ericulis.com. And until next time, folks, cheers.